Corrie Ten Boom, Keeper of the Angel's Den by Janet and Jeff Benj, Chapter 3, Part 2. Page 38. Corrie knelt beside her and began to pray. She prayed for the people who were being hurt or killed by the bombs that were falling. She prayed for her father, for Willem and Tyne and their children, and for her sister Nolly, her husband Flip, and their children. She also prayed for Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands. She even said a prayer for the Prime Minister. When Corrie was finished, she waited for Betsy to take her turn. Betsy began. God, we bring before you the German pilots up in those planes dropping bombs on us right now. We pray their eyes will be opened to the evil ways of Hitler. God bless them and let them know you are with them always. Corrie opened her eyes and stared at her sister as if she were a stranger. For the second time in a single night, Corrie was surprised by the actions of someone she thought she knew well. First, her father had angrily turned off the radio and called the Prime Minister a fool. And now her sister was praying for the Germans? She closed her lips tight. She would not say anything to upset Betsy right now, but there was no way on earth she would say amen to such a ridiculous prayer. The next morning, Caspar Ten Boom came for breakfast at exactly 8:15, as he always did. He read a chapter from the Bible, went to work in the clock shop at 9 o'clock. However, he didn't get much work done. A never-ending procession of people dropped by. Corrie and Betsy spent that day and the next 4 days ferrying pots of steaming coffee from the kitchen to the workshop and sales room. Ferrying, vocabulary word, to carry from one place to another. Ferrying. It's like a ferry boat. Spelled the same way. Corrie carried the small radio from the dining room where it was kept into the sales room. There was more news. The Prime Minister of Great Britain, 71-year-old Neville Chamberlain, had resigned, and Winston Churchill had become the new Prime Minister. Okay, there's Winston Churchill. Oh, that's a silly picture. There, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Winston Churchill had become the new Prime Minister of England. Great Britain. When Corrie heard this, she hoped that Churchill would be tougher on Hitler than Chamberlain had been. Most of all, though, she wanted to hear what the radio stations had to say about Holland. Unfortunately, the German and English stations each said the same thing. Holland was hopelessly outnumbered by German tanks and manpower, and it would be only a matter of time before German tanks rumbled across the eastern border and occupied Holland. Luxembourg and Belgium to the south were also under attack. Some visitors to the clock shop wanted Corrie's father to pray for them. Others just seemed to want to sit at the beige as if somehow the peace of the Ten Boom home could protect them from what lay ahead. But it could not. 5 days after the Prime Minister had promised peace, it came, but not in the way he had intended. The Dutch put up a good fight, even though they were hopelessly outnumbered by the Germans. But May 14th, 1940, became the blackest day in the history of the Netherlands. Adolf Hitler, frustrated by the way the Dutch were resisting his efforts, ordered the city of Rotterdam bombed. By the end of the day, 1,000 Dutch men, women, and children were dead, and over 78,000 were homeless. 21 churches and 4 hospitals were among the buildings that lay in ruins. When Hitler threatened to reduce the nearby city of Utrecht to rubble as well, the Dutch Prime Minister signed a surrender. The day before, Queen Wilhelmina had fled to Great Britain aboard a British warship. In London, she set up Radio Orange. Orange was the color of Dutch royalty. Throughout the rest of the world, Radio Orange broadcast news in Dutch every night, and Queen Wilhelmina often spoke to the people, encouraging them to keep fighting. When the country surrendered, many Dutch soldiers escaped to England, where they hoped to regroup and one day take back their homeland from the Germans. At first, nothing too much changed in Holland. There were German soldiers on the streets and in vehicles. Their huge truck wheels going through the puddles formed by summer showers splashed Corrie as she rode her bicycle to Nolly's house. And everywhere it seemed that people were speaking German. There was also a curfew. Oh, there's a curfew in Brownsville right now. There was also a curfew, but it was for 10 o'clock at night, and since none of the 10 booms were ever out that late, it didn't affect them at all. There were rules, though, which forbade group meetings. That's what's going on in Brownsville right now. So the Triangle Club had to stop, and everyone was issued ration cards, or ration cards. The products that were available for purchase with the cards were listed in the newspaper on Saturday. Betsy had always been a creative cook, stretching the food money as far as it would go, so no one at the Beige really noticed the difference. She was already stingy with the chicken and the chicken stew and the chicken noodle soup and the beef stew. She was already stingy with it, so they couldn't tell the difference. Strangely enough, the clock business was booming. German soldiers were always in the clock shop looking for some souvenir to send home. The 10 Boom clock shop sold more clocks and watches in the first year of occupation by the Germans than it ever had in a single year before. A few weeks after the occupation of Holland began, the Germans demanded that all radios be handed in to the Dutch police, who were now firmly under the control of the German army. Corrie would have probably sent in both radios if her nephew Peter, her sister Nolly's oldest son, hadn't spoken up. Corrie, Betsy, and Peter were sitting together in the parlor, listening to Peter play a piece by Brahms on their ancient piano. When Peter was finished, Corrie sighed and patted the old radio. I hate to have to take this down to Vroom and Dreesen's store, but I received a flyer in the mail today. All radios in Harlem are to be handed over to the Germans. Corrie sighed again and then went on. It's been such a joy to Father, and the radio is the only way we get any news. She hates to give this up. Betsy nodded gloomily. Corrie continued, all you read in the newspaper is how wonderful the Germans are doing, and how happy we should be to be a part of their great Aryan empire. I only buy the newspaper so Betsy can know what to buy with the ration cards. I never read the rest of it. I just use it to start the fire in the stove. She half laughed to herself. Without the speeches from Prime Minister Churchill and the news from Radio Orange, how will we ever know how things are really going? The question hung in the air. As far as Corrie was concerned, it was unanswerable. That is, until Peter spoke up. But don't you see, Tante Corrie? We don't have to do what they tell us. You can keep one of the radios. Why, there must be 100 places you could hide it in this old house. Now, remember, he said Tante Corrie. That must be an aunt in Dutch. His mother, Nolly, is Corrie's sister. Amazed, Corrie turned to look at Peter. She had never thought of not doing what the Germans told her to do. But it was true. The Beige was the perfect hiding place for the small radio. Of all the houses on the, oh boy, here's that big word, Barteljorastraat, the Beige was the most irregular, since it was actually two houses joined together. When the houses were joined, there was a 5-foot difference in the level of the floors in each house. This meant there were all sorts of funny-shaped nooks and crannies around the house. When the 10 Boom children were small, they had often played a game where one of them tapped on one side of the wall, while one of the others had to guess what was on the other side. It was nearly impossible to know, with the twists and turns of the stairs, the strange angles of the walls, and the 5-foot difference between the two houses. Strange things in a house. What does that put in mind? Moving walls, hidden pathways, hidden. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Yep. House of Dice Rear. Corrie's imagination began to go to work. Corrie knew the beige as well as anyone. Where was a good place to hide the radio? It would have to be easy to get to when they wanted to listen to the news. Let's go and look at the stairs, said Peter, interrupting her thoughts. Betsy, Corrie, and Peter all walked slowly up and down the stairs. Corrie felt strange. She was a 48-year-old woman in her own home looking for some way to trick the enemy. Somehow it didn't seem quite real. Corrie began to giggle at the situation. Peter gave her a stern look, and she stopped. Here, this is a perfect hiding place, Peter announced, stopping on the stairs just outside his grandfather's room. Look at this. It was made to hide something. I'll pull away the planks, and you can put the radio in the hollow. I'll put the planks back on top, and you can pull them away when you need to listen to the radio. Peter smiled at his plan, and then he added, it's close to the piano, too. Corrie didn't understand why being close to the piano was important, but Peter seemed to have thought of everything. One of you can play the piano loudly while the others listen to the news. It will work perfectly, he explained further. Corrie looked at her musical teenage nephew, and she didn't feel like giggling anymore. He should be in school preparing for university, she told herself sadly, not dreaming up schemes to outwit an occupying army. Corrie felt a flash of hatred for the Germans. The intensity of it surprised her. Intensity, vocabulary word, especially strong measure. Intensity, the feeling she has of hatred for the Germans. Later that day, Corrie carried her father's wonderful old radio off to Vroom and Dreesen's store. Oh, she took the old one. Now, why'd she take the old one and not the new one? Good. The new one's small. A Dutch policeman there copied the information from her identity card, which all Dutch people now had to carry at all times. When he'd finished copying the information, he consulted a list of addresses. Cornelia ten Boom. I see there are 3 of you living at this address. Are you sure you have only one radio between all of you? The policeman asked. Corrie looked him directly in the eye. Of course. Why would we need more than one? The policeman grunted and waved her on. Corrie rushed home to tell Peter she had completed her first act against the invaders of her country. The beige now had an illegal radio hidden beneath one of the stairs. That night and every night after, a member of the family would pry open the planks in the stairway and tune the radio to the BBC in London, as the British Broadcasting Company. It's still on. There's still the station BBC now, British Broadcasting Company. As they did so, someone else would beat out loud, cheerful tunes on the piano to cover up the sound of the radio. When the broadcast was over, they would all gather in the parlor for a report on how the war was going. Unfortunately, the news was hardly ever good. By the end of June 1940, France was under German occupation too. It seemed that Holland's main usefulness to Germany lay in its closeness to England. Of all the countries in Northern Europe, Great Britain was the only one that hadn't come under Hitler's rule. So I'm going to read that again. Of all the countries in Northern Europe, Great Britain was the only one that hadn't come under Hitler's rule. German bombers used the airports in Holland to launch air raids on London. While most Dutch people felt sorry for the English, they also reasoned that as long as the Germans' main use for Holland was a place from which to attack Great Britain, they were reasonably safe. The German army appeared to be passing through Holland rather than trying to change it. But Corrie had listened to all Willem had told her, and she had a feeling something awful was about to happen in her country. At first, she wasn't sure what it would be, but bit by bit, the signs began to show themselves. Soon, Corrie would be forced to make decisions that would forever change her life and the lives of those she loved. Now, what's that called? What Janet and Jeffrey Bench just did. Yes, foreshadowing. The end of chapter 3.